A spectacular Mediterranean island with a luxurious and decadent hotel.
If you've never seen Pike's, you've never been to Ibiza.
Its owner, a legendary adventurer and playboy.
Mr. Pike has had in excess of 3,000 lovers.
But when someone offers to buy the hotel,
It was exciting to hear it. $5 million US cash.
it turns out it's too good to be true.
This is just a cold-blooded intercontinental transatlantic fraud turned into murder for hire.
From Miami to the Mediterranean, an amazing true story of con artists, beautiful women, and runaway greed. Tonight on Power, Privilege, and Justice.
The islands off of Miami are home to the very richest of the international jet set. A luxurious paradise of mansions, yachts, trophy wives, and enormous egos. On the evening of February 16, 1998, a windsurfer found the body of a man on a beach in Key Biscayne. The victim had been shot twice in the head.
One was a distance shot, it could have been a couple feet away, and then execution style, he's finished off the back of the head.
It was one of the most calculated homicides I ever dealt with.
Police find a bracelet and a travel visa and identify the victim as Dale Pike, 43. They also discover that Pike had just flown to Miami from Ibiza, Spain, another island haven for rich pleasure seekers. The victim's father, Tony Pike, owns a famous hotel on Ibiza.
Tony Pike and his hotel were legendary. Celebrities from around the world came to stay at the hotel and party with Tony. But now his son was dead, and he was left wondering who did it.
For decades, Ibiza has been the destination of choice for the rich who spend their money chasing escape. The beaches are beautiful, the clubs never close, and there are plenty of substances to abuse. On an island famous for decadence, the prince of pleasure was Tony Pike.
Nice to meet you. There was 9 Icelandic finalists that came here. After that shot, they all relaxed so much they all took their tops off.
He's legendary.
His hotel was the place where rock stars
That was Bon Jovi. That's with Julio Iglesias.
and the rich came to relax and mingle.
Anybody who was anybody, if they came to Ibiza, they would come and stay at Pike's.
Tony Pike's parties for celebrities like singer Julio Iglesias and Freddie Mercury of Queen were all-night marathons.
It was very, very decadent. And it was over the top.
But Pike himself had come from humble beginnings. Born into poverty in England, he joined the Navy at 14.
I grew 5 inches in the first year at sea because I had food for the first time.
By 19, he'd settled in Australia with a wife and soon had 2 sons, Dale and Bradley. But domestic life proved too tame for Tony. He traveled around the world, bouncing from adventure to adventure and wife to wife. He was a photographer in Africa, a ship's captain in Thailand. In 1974, his ship went down and he was lost at sea with a model.
Well, she said, I don't mind being here, I know I'm going to die, but I wish I could have married you first. I said, well, I can marry you. I was the ship's captain.
It was a story that helped launch the legend of Tony Pike.
I promised her to be faithful. I mean, I couldn't be unfaithful in the middle of the ocean. That night, we got rescued. That's how we were when we were rescued. It should have been a perfect marriage.
But the marriage only lasted a year.
I could not go straight.
A few years later, Tony and another girlfriend landed in Ibiza. Tony bought an old farm and built the hotel himself.
Everybody said I was raving mad. This was the middle of the countryside. There was no roads, no sewage, no drainage, no water, no electricity, nothing. Well, it started to be known as a sort of quirky, quaint little place. The first big break was when George Michael came and he made the video Club Tropicana. I was in the video shaking the cocktails and he got Video Award of the Year for it. And the rest is history. He went famous and made me famous, or the hotel famous.
But by the 1990s, business was slowing down, and so was Tony, who was entering his 60s. Tony wanted to pass on the business to his sons, Dale and Bradley, but he didn't think they could handle it.
Wonderful guys, they're my sons, and I guess they're a bit like me. You know, a bit individualistic. But they didn't like work, and that's where they differ.
Tony's older son, Dale, had worked a number of times at the hotel, but things had never quite worked out.
Dale wanted to be his father, and in any little chicken farm there can only be one rooster, and two roosters cause a little bit of a problem.
By 1992, Bradley was living in Australia and Dale in Malaysia. Tony began to think about selling the hotel.
He was looking for either business partners or a form of investment.
Tony found what he was looking for when a flashy German entrepreneur named Thomas Knott checked into the hotel. The 26-year-old Knott said he'd been a professional tennis player in Germany before getting into business. He wouldn't say exactly what business he was in.
He had his own jet at the airport. And he was money, money, money. Flamboyance, flamboyance, flamboyance.
At Pike's, where he was known to throw around $100 bills, he commanded the full attention of the staff.
We were all at the hotel very happy that he had arrived.
Tony went to Knott's room to introduce himself.
I knocked on the door, he said, come in. I went in, and he's laying there with a robe on, and his legs, there's a girl there. So then I said, I'll come back later. He said, no, we'll be finished in a moment, please don't go. So I walked in, I didn't quite know where to put my eyes. Well, I didn't want to look at the actual action. So then he finished, and he stood up, and he said, oh, at last we meet. Thomas Knott. I said, Tony Pike. And that's how we met. And little did either of us know what would happen after that meeting.
No one at the hotel spent money like Thomas Knott. He drank only the most expensive champagne and stayed in Pike's grandest suite. When Tony was with Knott, he must have forgotten those tough years in Australia growing up poor.
Thomas was accepted by Tony and introduced, at least once that we know of, as this is like one of my sons. This is my son.
I was old enough to be his father, obviously, and he was, whereas my sons weren't successful in that way, he was ultra successful.
Before long, Knott proposed that he buy into Tony's hotel and become Tony's partner.
He said, you don't know me, but I'm a financial guru. And I've got an idea which will make you a lot of money. He said, you run the hotel, leave the financing to me.
Knott soon talked Tony into making improvements to the hotel. Knott said he would pay for them later. Then, he abruptly left for Germany.
I'm trying to get in touch with Thomas. I can't locate him. I sent emails, faxes, telephone calls. He's disappeared. No get a call. He's been taken by authorities, arrested. He's been sentenced to, I think, 4 years in prison.
Thomas Knott had been involved in what, to that date, was the largest single financial fraud in German history.
14 counts of embezzlement and several counts of credit card frauds related to real estate transactions.
If I was in business with someone who went to jail, I would be relieved that he was out of my life. But Tony saw Knott as a younger version of himself. Having a soft spot for Thomas Knott would turn out to be a fatal mistake.
Hello?
In 1997, Tony Pike heard from his former friend Thomas Knott. Knott had been released from prison in Germany after serving 3 years on a fraud conviction. He had moved to Florida and wanted to see Tony again.
He said, please do, please come over. It won't cost you anything. I'll have you picked up by limo and I'll spoil you rotten.
In November, Tony left his fourth wife and went to visit Knott on Williams Island, just outside of Miami.
When I arrived to Williams Island, it was obviously the lifestyle of the rich and famous. There was those kind of people there. And it was a rich man's abode. It was a good lifestyle.
Extremely exclusive and wealthy area. It's sometimes been touted as the local Riviera.
Williams Island was built for the rich. Knott said he was in real estate and he fit right in. His stint in prison had done nothing to cramp his style.
I go to his apartment and there's blondes everywhere. Just incredible. They're coming out the doorways in various states of undress.
Tony moved into Knott's apartment. Cannot lavished him with women and showed him a good time.
They would go to South Beach, they would go to expensive restaurants, they would go all over town. And during most of this time, Thomas Cannot was picking up the check.
He was the most incredible host. Going to a restaurant, would not allow you to pay for one drink. He would not allow it.
Tony was sort of being romanced, I guess you'd call it, by Thomas.
Over drinks, Cannot brought up his old proposal that he and Tony become partners in the hotel. Despite Cannot's criminal past, Tony agreed.
Well, the only way I can think of him is a lovable rogue.
Tony has had an awful lot of faith in Thomas Cannot. Great deal of faith.
But Thomas Cannot was about to get some competition.
I was swimming in the pool and I looked up and there's this guy with a bald head and his two children in front of him.
He was an Italian businessman named Enrico Forti, called Chico by his friends. The children were his two daughters by his beautiful young wife Heather, a former model. Forti had been a windsurfing champion in Italy and turned to business, first as a TV producer for ESPN, then as an investor in real estate.
When I met him, he owned numerous apartments in Williams Island, worth well over $1 million.
Former State Senator Paul Steinberg was Forti's personal attorney and friend.
He knew everybody. I know he was on the first-name basis with Prince Rainier of Monte Carlo, because he called him in my presence to ask him something at one time.
Pike and Forti quickly became friendly. Before long, they were talking about Tony's hotel.
Tony Pike was losing money in the hotel. Tony Pike owed money to various lenders on his hotel. Had problems with an ex-wife, making claims against the hotel. And Chico, being the promoter that he was, said, well, maybe I could help.
Incredibly, the businessmen were soon vying with each other to spend money on Tony.
Chico said, do you have wills? I said, no, not here. So that evening I was having a martini with Thomas in his apartment and Chico came down. He threw some keys at me and as I caught them, I saw the emblem said Rolls Royce. It's 1974, but the collector's item apparently in the States. So I sat in it, nice leather upholstery, and I thought, this is the bollocks, you know.
But when Cannot saw Tony's new car, he made a counteroffer.
And Thomas said, listen, you don't need that old Rolls Royce. You need a new car. What's your favourite car? I said, well, I've always wanted a Mercedes Sports. He said, well, I'll get you one. So I told Chico that Thomas has bought me this Mercedes. So he said, I'll buy you a Bentley convertible. Would you like that? I said, well, it'd be wonderful. That's the dream car for me.
These so-called businessmen were falling all over themselves to impress Tony, and Tony was loving it. But the friendly competition was about to get a lot nastier.
Chico comes in and said, look, I've heard about your deal you're doing with Thomas. It'll never happen.
Forti goes on to say that Cannot is broke and that he's conning Tony.
But he's got nothing. He said, so anything he tells you is false. He said, do you want to sell the hotel? I said, well, anything's for sale if I get the right price. He said, what's the right price? I said, well, I wouldn't take less than $5 million US. He said, all right. He said, consider it sold.
The plan was for Tony to stay on as manager while Forti handled the business side.
Tony would have all the same benefits and millions of dollars that he was supposed to be paid by Enrico Forti.
Forti moved Tony away from Cannot and into an apartment next door to him. Shortly afterwards, Tony says he was stricken by a recurring tropical illness he had contracted on a trip to the Pacific. The condition left him feverish and vulnerable.
I wasn't myself, I was on medicines. I know one time, Forti came in the middle of the night and said, sign these documents. And I'd taken sleeping pills. I've been having drinks. I signed about 13 documents.
In Ibiza, hotel manager Antonio Fernandez was growing worried.
We felt that it was really difficult to get in touch with him.
Fernandez suspected that Forti was up to no good and called Tony.
I remember saying, don't sign anything. Don't sign until you ask your family, your son.
Well, I didn't listen to anyone because they weren't there, and I thought, how can they tell me what's going on?
While in Miami, Tony lost some of his credit cards. He asked Fernandez to send him new ones, care of Thomas Cannot.
Every time I sent a credit card, the new credit card was missing. And at the end, it was also missing the money he had in his account on the bank.
After 2 weeks on Williams Island, Tony returned to Ibiza, only to learn that his credit card debt was over $100,000. Forti was right. Thomas Cannot had conned him.
Thomas took his credit card numbers and used his credit cards to purchase lifestyle items.
All the money that Connaught was spending on his friend Tony, all his other friends, and himself, was Tony's money.
Now I feel like a stupid child, but at that time I couldn't do. He's showering me with praise, with gifts.
Forti flies to Ibiza to finalize the hotel deal with Tony. Forti says he'll help him get his money back from Connaught. Within hours of his arrival, the deal is done.
They came, they seemed very happy because they had made the business. Chico Forti tipped me with $100 note and said to me, from now on, Mr. Pike is the manager, I am the owner of the hotel.
It was the final alarm for Fernandez. He called Tony's sons, Bradley and Dale, who were both in Australia, and told them that Tony was being scammed.
The business manager said, I think one of you need to come and help your father to resolve these financial difficulties we're having because some of them look like Tony's being swindled.
It's Tony's older son, Dale, who flies back. By the time Dale arrives in Ibiza, Forti is gone.
Dale said, I don't like the look of it, Dad. And I said, come on, son, don't interfere in things you don't understand. I never gave him any credit. I still thought of him as a kid.
Dale convinces Tony that they should meet with Forti and Connaught to discuss the situation. They plan to fly to Miami on Saturday, February 14th. But at the last minute, Tony can't go. Dale decides to go anyway. His father would meet him in Miami in a few days.
Dale was under the impression that this was a big cheat, and he was going to go put a stop to it. And that's what he tried to do.
Yeah, he never said one word to me about that. If he had done, I wouldn't have let him go.
Dale Pike had never been able to measure up to his adventurous father. He finally had a chance to prove himself, but it would cost him his life.
On February 14th, 1998, Dale Pike was on his way to Miami to straighten out his father's business affairs. As he waited for his connecting flight in Madrid, he called his father.
He said, oh, Dad, just ringing to tell you the plane's been delayed an hour, but they're boarding now. But I'll ring you from Miami. He said, the main reason I rang is to tell you I love you. I said, well, thanks, Dad. I said, I love you too, son. That's the last words I ever said to him.
Dale was on a mission. He was looking out for his father, but he had no idea what was waiting for him in Miami. His welcome would be anything but warm.
2 days later, on February 16th, David Suchinski, a windsurfer, left work early and headed for a secluded beach on the island of Key Biscayne.
The weather was intense. The beach was closed. There's nobody out here. I'm ready, baby.
As he entered the water, Suchinski noticed something unusual, drag marks in the sand.
Just like that. Shoulder width. Just like that. The whole way up the beach. And over. Like this. The biggest thing that got me was the huge volume of blood.
But Suchinski wanted to windsurf. He decided to investigate later. It wasn't until 6 p.m., as Suchinski dismantled his board, that he discovered the source of the drag marks.
I guess, got up to start hauling stuff or looked in this area and I saw the ravine and I just, boom, a very pale white body face down in about 6 inches of water. At that point, I freaked out and ran. I was just so concerned that whoever did that to him could still be around and, I could end up the same way. So I bolted.
My homicide detectives get out to the scene just after dark on the evening of February 16th.
One of the first to arrive was investigator Les Fernandez.
Basically, the likelihood of it at that point was that it might have had something to do with a homosexual type murder. This beach at night is frequented by couples, both male and female, come out here to have sex and all that.
The first shot, that's the distance shot. He goes down, and the second shot is the execution style, where the person comes up to him and shoots him up close and personal.
On the beach, detectives find a number of intriguing clues to the victim's identity, including a charm bracelet that says Pikes and a visa form.
And it had the name Pike/Iberia. Iberia, of course, is the airline. And we found Anthony Dale Pike was a passenger on a plane from Madrid, Spain to Miami, Florida, the day before we discovered the body. That would have been Sunday evening.
The detectives learned that Dale was served a meal on the plane at 4 and landed at 5.
When we did the autopsy, it looked like he had just eaten a meal. And that tells me that he got off that airplane and shortly thereafter he was killed.
The police called Pike's hotel in Ibiza and talked to Fernandez, the business manager.
The manager of the hotel told us that Dale Pike had just flown the previous Sunday, the day before we discovered the body, from Ibiza to Madrid to Miami, Florida, to meet with 2 businessmen to discuss some financial transactions.
After talking to Fernandez, the police speak with Bradley, Dale's brother in Australia.
He's the one that told us Dale was flying to Miami to straighten out all this stuff and confront these 2 businessmen because he suspected them of fleecing Tony.
The police learn that Forti and Knott live on Williams Island. They're unable to locate Knott, but they make contact with Forti, who calls them.
He did say, well, is Dale dead, or something to that effect. I said, gee, that's an interesting question. Why would you think that, you know?
Forti tells police he was nowhere near Key Biscayne on the night of the murder. He says he was supposed to pick Dale up at the airport. He waited for him, but he never arrived.
As soon as he said Dale never got off the airplane, he was like glowing in the dark. You know, he was in my crosshairs.
Forti is now a suspect in the murder, and the detectives learn that Tony Pike is flying to Miami to meet Forti at the airport in just a few hours.
We felt there was at least a possibility Tony could be at risk.
The detectives need to protect Tony. They also see an opportunity to put some pressure on Enrico Forti.
We took Tony off the airplane dressed as an employee, put him in a car, took him straight to a hotel, parked him in the hotel, and kept him out of sight. At the same time, we had detectives watching Enrico Forti, who's at the concourse waiting for the passengers to come off the plane. And when all the passengers finish coming out and there's no Tony Pike, Enrico is so agitated he gets in an argument with the people at the counter at the airline. They call the police at the airport, not knowing we're right there watching, but we're not going to intervene. And the police get there and essentially throw Enrico out of the airport.
Forti's frantic actions confirm the detective's suspicions. But a check of his records turns up nothing, not even a parking ticket. Then they get a break. Airport paging records from February 15th, the night Dale arrived in Miami, indicate that he and Forti were paging each other for an hour before finally meeting. Forti has lied. Even more damning, cell phone records reveal that Forti made a phone call to his wife from Key Biscayne on the night of the murder.
Things were not looking good for Enrico. We already could see that there was a pattern of deception surrounding this crime. And normally when you're investigating, if someone lies to you about a material fact, you can assume guilty knowledge.
Now the cops have something to talk to Forti about. He had lied about picking up Dale at the airport. Forti voluntarily comes to the police station the next day for questioning.
We interrogated him for some time. We couldn't shake him. So we confront him with the paging records from the airport that indicate they met each other. So he tells us another story that Dale's going to go party someplace. And we confront him now with his cell phone records showing that he made some phone calls very close to the murder scene. And at this point, Enrico Forti says, okay, I'll have to tell you the truth now, you got me. But I can't really discuss it with you. I'm in business with this guy, Thomas Knott. He's a big-time German criminal, and he'll kill my family if I tell you the truth.
When cops get a suspect in a position like this, they just grind away. Forti was in for a long night, but the police could afford to wait. They knew eventually he would crack.
After 10 hours of questioning, Enrico Forti finally breaks down. He suggests that Thomas Knott may be responsible for Dale Pike's murder.
He says, Knott said, we got to get rid of this guy. If you know what's good for you, if you don't want your family hurt, you pick him up, you bring him to me.
Forti says he was just following Knott's directions and didn't know what he was planning. Detective Campbell recalls Forti's account of what happened that night.
Enrico picks up Dale Pike at the Miami airport, drives him to a restaurant, which is on the same causeway as the murder scene, and drops Dale Pike off in the parking lot next to a white Lexus driven by a big German guy named Hans. and that he tells Dale, get in the car with that man, he's going to take care of you. And that's the last he knows or saw of Dale Pike.
The police investigate Knott's background. What they learned fits in with what Forti has already told them.
What we discovered is Thomas Knott was a convicted thief from Germany, and that he's a con man. He makes his living by stealing and defrauding people and institutions.
The police also learn about the 100 grand Knott had run up on Tony Pike's stolen credit cards. There's more evidence pointing to Knott in his apartment. When police search it, they find a shotgun and a receipt for a .22 caliber handgun, both registered to Thomas Knott.
That was of interest to us because the type of firearm used to kill Dale Pike was a .22 caliber pistol.
But there's no sign of the .22 or Thomas Knott. They trace his cell phone, but he's never in one place long enough to catch. Then, Knott makes a series of calls from South Beach.
That put us in the right neck of the woods, and then we just flooded the area.
The cops found Knott in South Beach living out of his car. He had a $20 bill in his pocket, that's it. The criminal mastermind had been living off pretzels and cola from the local convenience store.
Knott denies having anything to do with killing Dale Pike, and he has an alibi for the night of the murder.
Thomas Knott had a dinner party at his apartment at the evening that Dale Pike arrived. 7 different people were prepared to swear that he was at that dinner party.
Knott says Forti took him to an ATM machine 2 nights after the murder and gave him $1,000 to leave town, saying the cops were after him for his credit card fraud.
We happen to believe that because we found the ATM withdrawal when he subpoenaed Forti's bank records.
Knott says Forti is trying to set him up. He says the gun registration found in his apartment really belongs to Forti.
His excuse to us is that Enrico Forti actually bought the guns and he just asked me to put them in my name. The guns were paid for by Enrico Forti's credit card, which was true.
Knott says Forti is trying to frame him because Forti is really the murderer, and he's trying to steal Pike's hotel.
At this stage in the investigation, Thomas Knott's kind of pointing the finger at Enrico Forti, and Enrico Forti's pointing the finger at Thomas Knott.
Clearly, nobody here was innocent. Both these guys were con men. The question was, which one was responsible for the murder of Dale Pike?
As they dig further into Knott's past, the investigators realize that they need the help of a fraud expert to sort out all of Knott's cons and scams.
They stretched from Germany to the United States, all over the Miami, Florida area. Forgeries, thefts. I'd estimate that Thomas made about $250,000 in the year that I looked at.
Johnson sees plenty of evidence that shows Knott was conning Tony Pike out of money, but that doesn't mean Knott is the killer.
Thomas was using Tony Pike as sort of an annuity program. He would steal $4,000 or $5,000 every month, regular as clockwork. It was that was kind of his job, and we really didn't think he'd want to do anything to disrupt that.
I just don't see him as a person who would kill over what was to him a relatively minor fraud.
Back in Ibiza, as the months pass and the cops seem to be getting nowhere, Tony Pike is growing restless.
We try not to discuss Dale, but of course everyone wants to know what's happened, but I don't know. I know he's dead. Some bastards killed him. Why?
With an anxious father on their backs, the cops were feeling the pressure. So far, all they had on Forti were his lies and some circumstantial evidence. They'd need a lot more than that to take him to trial.
Six months into the investigation of Dale Pike's death, police are sure that the moving force behind the murder isn't Thomas Knott, it's Enrico Forti, but they have little hard evidence.
I said to the police, do you have any proof? They said, no, we don't. We know that somebody killed him, and we are all convinced it's Forti. And we have to back our hunches and prove beyond all reasonable doubt that it was Forti, and this is what we're trying to do.
Then, among the documents in Forti and Knott's apartments, the detectives find what they're looking for. Evidence which they believe proves Forti had a motive for the murder.
There were multiple copies of documents that basically said Tony Pike is giving his hotel and all of his assets to Chico Forti. Nobody would ever do that. I would never sign over my personal bank account to you if I'm selling you my business. It's ridiculous. But those are the kind of documents that we had.
Although documents say that Forti owns the multi-million-dollar hotel, he's only given Tony $25,000.
It demonstrated the lengths that Mr. Forti would go to achieve his goal of acquiring the hotel. He was prepared to fabricate documents and present them to a court of law in an effort to acquire his interest in the hotel.
Tony Pike believed what Forti had told him and signed papers he never even read. Forti had stolen the hotel out from under his nose, and Tony didn't even know it.
Why would I give away the hotel? I worked for 20 years. I spent every penny I own on that hotel. Why would I give away?
As the police continue to talk to people on Williams Island, they discover another side of Forti, a history of suspicious deals, including a plan to buy the houseboat where Andrew Cunanan, Gianni Versace's killer, had committed suicide.
Chico, he says, we're probably going to make a movie of Versace and Cunanan's death, and the houseboat is a prop. He says, I'd like to have the rights to it.
The houseboat sank right at its moorings on Miami Beach before they could effect a transfer.
Campbell finds evidence that Forti had committed a number of frauds involving property in Miami. Then, an informant comes forward claiming that Forti was upset about an attorney that had sued him.
The informant claimed he was hired by Enrico Forti to kill this attorney, and the informant described to us murder circumstances in that planned homicide remarkably similar to the murder of Mr. Pike.
Although they can't prove the informant's claim, investigators feel it's a strong indicator that Forti was capable of murder, but they still have no physical evidence, and without physical evidence, they have no case. Detectives had already searched Forti's Range Rover once and found nothing. Forti apparently cleaned it the day after the murder.
We decided to give the car one more shot, even though we've disassembled the stupid thing already. Well, in the trailer hitch, we found a small quantity of sand. We sent that to the University of Miami. This was like a long shot, and it certainly wasn't one that I was optimistic about.
The analysis takes over 2 months as they compare the sample from the Range Rover to sand from all over Miami. Finally, the results are sent to Campbell.
That sample from the trailer hitch of the car was described by our expert as being closest to the sample that we recovered 50 feet from the body.
The police have finally tied Forti to the murder scene with physical evidence.
Astounding evidence for our beliefs. It helped enlighten us, I think, a great deal about who did this murder.
Prosecutors now have enough to charge Enrico Forti with the murder of Dale Pike, but they're not sure they have enough to persuade a jury to convict him.
They had the sand, but no murder weapon, no witnesses, and no evidence that directly tied Forti to the murder. Bringing Dale Pike's killer to justice was going to be tough.
Two years after the murder of Dale Pike, Enrico Forti and Thomas Cannot are both in police custody. Forti is being held for the murder of Dale Pike. Thomas Cannot is facing at least 15 years in prison on charges that he scammed Dale's father, Tony, out of $100,000.
Then the cops offered Cannot a deal, and he quickly took it. He agreed to provide information about Forti and testify against him in return for a reduced sentence. But even with Cannot's help, did they have enough to convict Forti? Remember, the evidence was only circumstantial, and juries tend not to like that.
We had everything that we were going to get on Enrico Forti, and we felt it was enough to get it in front of a jury and let a jury decide.
In court, prosecutor Reed Rubin and his witnesses paint a picture of Forti as a cold-blooded con man turned killer.
Enrico Forti was within days or weeks of this fraud being accomplished when Dale Pike suddenly shows up asking hard questions.
Dale arrived at the airport. He was taken into Forti's car.
You have to presume that Forti had someone else there to help him, because you can't get to the beach without going through these dark, deserted dirt roads first. And at that point is when I'm sure Pike realized something was amiss.
Dale was trying to run away from the guy who's trying to kill him. The first shot's to the back of his head. He goes down, and the murderer walks up to him, sticks the gun in the back of his head, and blows his brains out.
And then his body was stripped of clothing and he was dragged back naked and thrown into a ditch.
And sometime around 7 p.m., Forti's on his cell phone talking from a position very close to where we found the body. Ironically, the conversation was, I don't know who this Dale Pike guy is. He never got off the airplane. He must still be in Spain.
Why would Mr. Forti swear to the City of Miami Police Department that he didn't see Dale Pike when he knew he did, unless he knew that no one would ever see him alive again?
But Forti hires a team of lawyers, including Ira Lowy. They maintain that Forti is a father, a husband, a successful businessman who didn't need to kill for the money.
He wasn't Bill Gates wealthy, but he was a wealthy individual with a good lifestyle. So I don't see this where he was so obsessed with this hotel that he killed for it. That just doesn't make sense.
It's not logical. I've watched this man spend more money at a casino on a roll of a couple of dice than what he gave Tony Pike.
According to Forti and his defense team, the killer is actually Thomas Knott. Knott, they claim, was afraid Dale would report his credit card theft to the police and send him back to jail.
I think Thomas Knott knew a lot of shady people. A lot of shady people stayed at his apartment. Nobody we could pin it on, and I think he made arrangements to have someone go out there who would take care of the problem for him. And he used Kiko as his messenger without Kiko knowing at the time that this was going to happen.
Forti's lawyers seem to be making headway with the jury. Sitting in court, Tony Pike is getting worried.
The defense for Forti attacked everything that had been said by Reed Rubin, and he laughed at the evidence. I got very demoralized. I didn't feel confident at all.
Reed Rubin knows his case is circumstantial. In his closing argument, he pulls out all the stops.
He holds up a picture of my son, and he said, "This was Dale Pike when he arrived." He held up another picture. He held up another picture. His head's blown in, and he's nude on the beach, and they found him. He said, "That man is a murderer." And he pointed at Forti. He said, "He's a murderer." The judge said, recess, and the jury to go and deliberate and come back with a verdict.
The defense is confident that Forti will get off. They insist that his passport be kept in the building so that when the verdict comes in, he can leave for Italy right away. For the jury, the case was cut and dry. In just 90 minutes, they're back with their verdict. Enrico Forti is found guilty of murder.
But then when the verdict was final and it was done, sealed and delivered, the intense relief, you can't explain it.
Forti is sentenced to life without parole. He has created a website to help him enlist supporters and solicit contributions for his appeals.
You come here to relax.
Tony Pike is still in Ibiza, running his hotel, which is now catering to a more wholesome clientele. A year after the verdict, at the age of 68, he married his fifth wife, Dunya, a woman in her 20s. His son's ashes are buried under an olive tree at the entrance of the hotel. But for Tony, the case isn't closed.
All this time later, I still can't speak of Dale without getting emotional. Dunya, my wife, says, "I've got to let it go. I cannot keep living in the past. But I can't let it go. I've got to find out who else is involved." So someone else.
We will never know with complete certainty whether Thomas Knott was the person who aided Enrico Forti in killing Dale Pike or whether it was other people, although we're certain that more than one other person was involved.
And frankly, that's the only purpose Enrico Forti has left in this life, is to help us catch the other guys that got away with this.
Prosecutors have offered Forti a reduced sentence in exchange for naming the accomplice everyone agrees he would have needed. But Forti remains silent.
The loss is immense. Money can't replace it. Nothing can replace it. Whatever happens to Forti, he deserves.
Perhaps the only winner in this story is the enigmatic Thomas Knott. He served 3 years in a Miami prison and was returned to Germany. For Tony Pike, the quest for justice goes on. For Court TV, I'm Dominic Dunn.